There's a conversation sitting on your phone right now that you've read more times than you'd admit to anyone. Maybe it's the last thing someone said before they disappeared from your life. Maybe it's the argument that never actually ended. It just stopped. Nobody hung up. Nobody said the last word. It's just sitting there, unfinished. And some nights you open it and read it again, like it might say something different this time. It won't. And the strange part isn't that you keep checking it. The strange part is why your brain refuses to let you stop. There's a name for this. It's called the need for closure. And it's not a feeling. Not really. It's a mechanism. It's been measured. It's been studied for almost 100 years. And here's the part that's going to bother you a little. For a huge number of the losses that keep people up at night, closure was never actually possible in the first place. Psychologists have a scale that measures this, a body of research that traces all the way back to a waiter carrying a tray through a café in Vienna. And by the end of this, you're going to understand why some of the most respected grief researchers alive have started telling people to stop looking for closure altogether. Let's start there. Vienna. Sometime in the 1920s, a young psychology student named Zeigarnik is sitting with friends, watching the waiters work the room, and she notices something strange. The waiters can recite a table's entire order back with total precision. Every dish, every substitution, every special request, right up until the bill gets paid. The second the check is settled, that memory just goes. Ask the same waiter 5 minutes later what table 6 ordered, and he's got nothing. Her professor, a psychologist named Kurt Lewin, thought that was worth testing properly. So Zeigarnik brought people into a lab, gave them a string of small tasks, puzzles, simple assembly work, and quietly interrupted about half of them partway through. Afterward, she asked everyone what they remembered. People recalled the interrupted tasks almost twice as often as the ones they'd actually finished. Not because the unfinished ones were more interesting, because they were unfinished. She published the results in 1927, and she gave the effect a specific name, not a craving, not a habit, a quasi-need, an actual psychological tension that stays switched on until the task gets closed. That explains why a half-written email nags at you all afternoon. It does not explain why, 10 years later, you can still feel your stomach drop over a 5-minute conversation with someone you'll probably never speak to again. For that, an unfinished task isn't enough. We need something with a lot higher stakes than a to-do list. In 1994, a psychologist named Kruglanski, working out of the University of Maryland, took Zeigarnik's idea and turned it into something you can actually score a person on. Along with his colleague Donna Webster, he built what they called the need for closure scale, a real questionnaire designed to measure exactly how badly a specific person needs an answer, any answer, over sitting inside uncertainty. It's not one dial either, it's two. There's urgency, how fast you need the answer, and there's permanence, how badly you need it to stay settled once you've got it. Score high on both, and ambiguity doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels close to unbearable. Score low, and you can carry a question around for years without it costing you much at all. Here's the part that should sit with you for a second. This isn't about intelligence or maturity or how much inner work you've done. It's a dial that's simply turned differently in different people. So the friend who got over their breakup in 3 weeks, and the friend who's still turning it over 5 years later, neither one is doing it wrong. They might just be running 2 different settings on the exact same instrument, which raises the obvious question: why does not knowing feel less like curiosity and more like danger? For that, we have to go back a lot further than 1994.
Picture yourself 60,000 years ago. You hear a sound in the grass. Could be wind. Could be something that wants to eat you. Evolution doesn't reward the version of you that calmly sits with that ambiguity and waits for better data. It rewards the version that jumps to a fast, confident conclusion, even a wrong one, and gets moving. A false alarm costs a little energy and some embarrassment. An unresolved threat can cost you everything. So the brains that survived long enough to become your brain weren't the ones best at tolerating uncertainty. They were the ones worst at it. Ambiguity itself got wired up as a kind of danger signal, completely separate from whatever the ambiguous thing actually turns out to be, which means when your phone buzzes with a message from someone you're not sure still likes you, and you leave it unopened for an hour, some very old, very literal part of your brain is treating that unopened message exactly the way it would treat a sound in tall grass. Not knowing was never neutral to your nervous system. It reads as exposure, and unresolved uncertainty doesn't sit quietly in the background of your mind while you go about your day. Researchers who study anticipatory stress have found that the body's stress response can stay switched on longer under prolonged not knowing than it does after actually receiving bad news. Confirmed bad news, brutal as it sounds, at least gives the nervous system somewhere to land. Open-ended uncertainty just keeps the alarm running in the background with nowhere to put it down, which is a strange thing to sit with. Sometimes, the thing wearing you down harder than the loss itself is the part where you still don't know. Now, bring this all the way down to where most people actually feel it, the breakup. Ask anyone what closure means to them after a relationship ends, and you'll hear the same two things almost every time. Knowing the real reason it ended, and no longer feeling that pull toward the person who left. Here's the twist. Researchers who've studied people actively hunting for that explanation, replaying the last conversation, asking mutual friends, scrolling back through old messages for the exact moment it went wrong, have found something that doesn't match the intuition at all. Chasing the reason often makes the pain last longer, not shorter. The search itself keeps the wound open because every unanswered question you go digging for is, in Zeigarnik's language, one more file your brain refuses to close. So the explanation you think you need in order to move on might actually be the thing keeping you exactly where you are. That's uncomfortable. But it's nothing compared to what happens when there's no explanation coming at all. Not because someone's withholding it from you, but because it genuinely doesn't exist. In the 1970s, a family therapist named Pauline Boss, working out of the University of Minnesota, started noticing something in the families she treated that didn't fit any of the standard grief models. These were families of soldiers listed as missing in action. Nobody could tell them their son or husband was dead. Nobody could tell them he was alive. No body, no funeral, no confirmed anything. Just an open file that never got a final entry. Boss gave it a name: ambiguous loss. Loss with no confirmation and no ritual to mark it. She later worked with families after the September 11th attacks, many of whom never got remains back to bury, and she spent decades with something even quieter, and in its own way, crueler. Caregivers watching a parent disappear into dementia. The body is still sitting at the kitchen table. The person who used to live inside it is already gone. Grief with nowhere to land because the person you're grieving hasn't actually left the room. Her most recent book is called Plainly, The Myth of Closure, and her argument after 4 decades of this work isn't gentle. She says that for these families, closure was never a realistic goal to begin with. Chasing it wasn't just hard, it was chasing something that doesn't exist. And here's the part that should really get under your skin. Boss isn't only talking about missing soldiers and 9/11 families. She's suggesting the evidence points somewhere much bigger, that even the grief everyone assumes eventually closes, the normal, everyday kind, might be running on the exact same broken promise. So, if closure isn't something out there, waiting on a fact you just haven't found yet, what is it? Go back to Zeigarnik's lab for a second. In later versions of her experiments, something turned up that should change how you think about all of this. People didn't actually need to finish the task to relax the tension. Simply making a plan for finishing it later was often enough to quiet the feeling almost as well as actually doing it, which tells you the brain isn't chasing objective truth. It's chasing the feeling of an ending. That's why 2 people can walk away from the exact same relationship with 2 completely different, fully confident stories about what happened, and both of them will swear their version is the real one. Neither one is lying. Each brain built the story it needed to close its own file. Closure was never a fact sitting out there waiting to be discovered. It's something you construct, and that changes everything that came before it in this video. The waiters, the scale, the sound in the grass, the missing soldiers. None of it was ever really about getting the truth. It was always about getting the tension to stop. One more piece worth sitting with. For most of human history, ambiguity eventually resolved itself one way or another. The sound in the grass either left or it attacked. Now look at your phone. A message sits there marked read with no reply for 3 days straight. A job application disappears into total silence. A friendship just fades. No final conversation, no goodbye, just fewer texts until one day there aren't any left. Your ancestors' uncertainty always ended. One way or the other, a huge amount of yours never does. It just gets buried under the next notification. So here's where this actually lands. You don't need the last text. You don't need the real reason, the one true version of what happened, the apology that's never coming. That was never really the thing keeping you stuck. What you needed was for the file to close, and that was never a door someone else was standing on the other side of, holding shut. Pauline Boss spent 40 years with people who had every reason in the world to stay broken by not knowing. And what she found wasn't that the ones who healed eventually got their answers. It's that they learned to live inside the question instead of standing outside it, waiting for permission to move on. You were never actually waiting for someone to give you closure. You were waiting for permission you already had.